I'm 78 years old now, and if you had told me that I'd wake up with a smile on my face at this age, I would have laughed. But this morning, as the light streamed through the curtains and the sound of the surf filled the air, I found myself smiling. This little cottage, tucked away by the sea, has turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made. The sun's warm glow greeted me like an old friend, reminding me how lucky I am to have this place. It's been 5 years since Edgar left. 5 years since the silence of our big 2-story house on Cypress Street swallowed me whole. 49 years of marriage. Then suddenly the emptiness. For the first year, I wandered through our home, a ghost in my own life, bumping into his things, recoiling from memories that wouldn't let go. Bennett, our only son, came around twice a week to check on me, but it was always the same expression. On his face, a mixture of pity and annoyance. He never said it outright, but I knew he was waiting for me to get it together, to stop being what he probably thought of as a burden. Piper, his wife, was even less subtle. "Maybe you should think about nursing home, Hazel," she suggested one day, 3 months after Edgar's funeral. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, as if it were just a casual thought, like she was recommending a new restaurant. Seaside Cedars has excellent care, and they have round-the-clock supervision. I couldn't even bring myself to answer. I just shook my head, a quiet refusal. She never called me Mom, or even Mrs. Thorndyke, just Hazel. As if we were merely acquaintances, not family. The breaking point came when I found an old box of photographs in the garage. One in particular caught my eye. It was Edgar and me, standing on a beach in Gulfport. We were young, tanned, with sand on our bare feet. It was the year before Bennett was born. We had come to Gulfport for vacation, and we had promised each other that someday we'd live by the ocean. The next day I called the realtor. When I told Bennett I was selling the family home and buying a small cottage by the sea, he was furious. "You're selling the house I grew up in." His voice rang with disbelief. "What if Piper and I wanted it? It's part of the family history." "You never said you wanted to live there," I replied calmly, but I felt a wave of tension rise in me. "And besides," I added, trying to keep my cool, "you have a beautiful house in the suburbs." "It's not the same thing." "But that's not the point," he interrupted. "You're making huge decisions without consulting us. And the money, do you realize how much that cottage of yours by the sea will cost?" I had already considered it. After 40 years working as a pharmacist, I knew how to manage my finances. Edgar and I had saved, invested, and had pensions nothing extravagant, but enough to ensure I didn't need to worry. I could afford the move, but it would leave me with a smaller cushion than I had before. Of course, Piper was furious too. She immediately started making plans for my savings. "Hazel," she asked one Sunday, stirring her tea with a touch too much care, "don't you think those funds could be better used? Maybe setting something aside for Iris's education. Private schools are so expensive these days." At the time, Iris was 12, and she sat across from me, absorbed in her phone, not even listening. "I have a fund for Iris," I replied firmly. "Edgar and I started saving for her education the moment she was born." "But it might not be enough," Piper pressed. "Prices keep rising. And besides, Bennett has been talking about expanding the business. A small investment from you could help him." Before I could respond, Bennett spoke up. "Mom has a right to live her life the way she wants." His voice was rare, gentle, protective. The Bennett I remembered before Piper came into the picture. Held on to that moment. So I moved to Gulfport. I bought a charming little white cottage with blue shutters and a tiny garden, just 3 blocks from the ocean. The beach there wasn't as popular as the downtown one. It was rocky, quieter, the perfect place for me to find peace. For the first few months, I reveled in the calm, drinking coffee on the veranda and listening to the cries of the seagulls. I walked barefoot along the shore, feeling the cool ocean breeze on my face. In the evenings, I read the books I had been putting off for years, books I hadn't had the time for while raising a family. But eventually, I started to feel the absence of people. Not Bennett and his family, their visits always left me with a bitter taste. I longed for companionship, for laughter that didn't end in uncomfortable silences or veiled suggestions about money. One day I saw an ad for a gardening club at the local library. Why not? I thought. My garden could use some care, and maybe I could find some company along the way. It was there I met Rowena Prescott, a 73-year-old widow with a sharp tongue and a fierce passion for exotic orchids. She had lived in Gulfport her whole life and knew the town like the back of her hand. After the second meeting, she invited me for coffee. "You're not a local, but you're not a tourist either," she observed, adjusting her glasses. "What brings you to our sleepy little town?" I told her about Edgar, about Bennett, and about the difficult relationship with my daughter-in-law. The words poured out of me, and Rowena listened intently, nodding occasionally and pouring coffee into my cup without interruption. "Let me tell you something, darling," Rowena finally said when I had finished. "Stop living for others, especially those who only see you as an ATM machine. You've done your duty. You've raised a son. Now live for yourself." That advice stuck with me. From that moment on, Rowena and I became inseparable. She introduced me to the best restaurants, took me to local cafes, and even dragged me to a dance class for seniors. I resisted at first. Dancing in my 70s seemed absurd, but Rowena just laughed. "Honey, when else would you shock the audience if not now?" And shock I did. It was at one of these dance classes that I met Lloyd Avers, a retired fishing boat captain with a silver beard and striking blue eyes. He was tall, trim, and seemed as though he was always searching for something in the horizon. After class, he came over to me with a smile. "I didn't think I'd meet a new face here," he said, as if we were both equally surprised. "Most of the folks here are local old-timers." "I'm a new local," I replied, feeling a flutter of excitement I hadn't felt in years. He invited me for a walk along the waterfront, and I accepted without a second thought. We talked about the sea, about his travels, about books, and about my life as a pharmacist. He didn't ask why I'd moved to Gulfport alone, and for that, I was thankful. As the sun set and the water turned orange, he kissed my hand gently, asking if we could meet again. 2 weeks later, Bennett called. "Mom, you haven't been answering your messages," he said, his voice tinged with irritation. "We were worried." I smiled softly, resisting the urge to snap. "I've been busy." "Busy? What could you possibly be busy with?" "Dancing," I replied, my voice light but firm. "I'm dancing. It's very good for my joints." "Dancing?" Bennett asked incredulously. "At your age?" "Yes," I said, chuckling softly. "Dancing for the elderly. It's great for your mood." There was a pause before Bennett continued. "We wanted to invite you to lunch this weekend. Iris got a part in the school play." My heart lifted at the thought of seeing Iris. Despite the awkwardness, she always brought joy to my heart. "Of course I'll be there." On Sunday, I wore a new dress, a turquoise floral print, just like Rowena had picked out for me. "Enough of these drab old lady outfits," she had said, pulling me into the boutique. I even wore light makeup and styled my hair. It was a small change, but it felt good. When I arrived at Bennett and Piper's house, Iris opened the door and stopped, short, staring at me for a moment. "Grandma, you look different. Is that a compliment or a criticism?" I asked, grinning. "Compliment, of course." Iris gave me a tight hug, her tall frame towering over me. Piper's voice echoed from the hallway as she appeared, giving me an appraising. Look, new dress? It looks youthful. Thank you, I said, taking it as a compliment, even if I knew it wasn't meant as one. Lunch was, as usual, tense and polite. Bennett talked about work, Iris about her school play. Piper hardly participated. In the conversation, her attention divided between correcting Iris and keeping her distance from me. Mom's recently started going dancing, Bennett said abruptly during dessert. Piper raised an eyebrow. Really? What kind of dancing? All kinds, I said, proud of my newfound freedom. Waltz, tango, even a little salsa. At the seaside club? Piper asked. Do pensioners gather there? Yes, mostly people my age, I replied, not missing a beat. And who do you dance with? Piper's voice was laced with honey, a sure sign that things were about to take an unpleasant turn. Different partners, I said with a smile. There are a lot of single men out there. Piper and Bennett exchanged a look, and Bennett began. Mom, you have to be careful. At my age, I was wise enough not to fall for scams, as he had implied. I'm just enjoying life, Bennett. I'm doing what makes me happy, I said. Firmly but calmly. The conversation faltered after that. But I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. After all, this was my life to live, and I intended to live it on my own terms. Some people could take advantage of your financial stability. That's it. Always. The conversation eventually came down to money. Speaking of finances, Piper intervened. Hazel, have you thought about helping Bennett expand his business? It's the perfect time to invest in his sector. Piper, Bennett said warningly. What? I'm just saying it would be a win-win for everyone. Hazel could earn interest and we could grow the company. Plus, the money would end up in the family anyway. I felt a wave of anger rising inside, but I held back. I didn't want to spoil a rare meeting with my granddaughter. I'll think about it, I said, even though I knew my answer would be no. Piper smiled victoriously, thinking she'd convinced me. After lunch, when Bennett had gone to his office to work, and Iris had gone upstairs to her room, Piper kept me in the living room. Hazel, I wanted to talk to you alone, she began. These new hobbies, dancing, gardening, it's nice, but don't you think you should be more conservative in your position? In what position? I asked, already knowing the answer. Well, you're a widow, an older woman, a grandmother. Some things can look inappropriate. Like what? Like colorful dresses and dancing with strange men. She lowered her voice. People might think, you're looking for company. What if I really am looking for company? I asked bluntly. What's wrong with that? Piper looked shocked. Hazel, you've been married for 49 years. Edgar would roll over in his grave to hear that. I felt the blood rush to my face. Don't you dare tell me what Edgar would have a thought. You barely knew him, and he'd want me to be happy. Not sitting in four walls mourning him for the rest of my life. And just looking out for the family's reputation. Piper replied coldly. And Ian, your well-being? These cavaliers can only be interested in your money. That's it, money again. You know, Piper, I said, standing up. Sometimes I think the only person interested in my money is you. I left without waiting for her answer and said goodbye to my granddaughter. On the way home, I reflected on how my relationship with my son had changed since his marriage. Bennett had always been a sensitive and caring boy, but around Piper, it was as if he was losing his own will, becoming a shadow of himself. When I got home, I called Lloyd. When I heard his deep, calm voice, I felt the tension of the last few hours recede. How was the family dinner? He asked. The usual, talking about my age, hinting at money, and disapproving of my lifestyle. Lloyd laughed softly. They just can't accept that you're living life to the fullest. It's hard for a lot of kids to see their parents as ordinary people with their own wants and needs. I guess you're right, I sighed. But so many times I get so tired of their judgment, especially from Piper. She thinks it's inappropriate for me to wear colourful dresses and dance at my age. Then we should definitely go to theatres this Friday, Lloyd said firmly. And you'll wear the most colourful dress you have. I smiled, feeling the weight in my heart recede. I may not be young anymore, but I'm still alive, and I'm not gonna let Piper or anyone else tell me how to live my life, or where to spend my own money anymore. Georgetown? I was flipping through the colourful brochure Lloyd had brought. Why there? It's a shrimp festival. Lloyd sat across from me on the veranda of my cottage, sipping his homemade lemonade. 3 days of music, seafood, and dancing in the open air. Plus, his eyes lit up with boyish excitement. I know the owner of a small hotel right by the bay. He's got 2 rooms with a view off water. 2 private rooms? I clarified, feeling the colour rise to my cheeks. Lloyd smiled, but there was no mockery in his gaze. Sure, we've only known each other 3 months, Hazel. I'm not rushing things. I nodded gratefully. In my 78 years, I'd grown accustomed to certain rules of propriety. And despite my newfound freedom, some things were slow to change. When are you planning the trip? Next weekend, Friday through Sunday. The festival starts Friday night with a boat parade with fireworks. It's a sight worth seeing. I pictured Lloyd and I standing on the dock watching the multicolored lights in the night sky. And I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. Sounds wonderful. I agree. Lloyd glowed, and for the nth time I thought how lucky I was to have met him. In his 73 years, he retained not only good health, but a lust for life that neither the loss of his wife 15 years ago, nor retirement could extinguish. He was the kind of man you want to smile around. I'll pick you up Friday morning about 8 o'clock, he said, getting up. The drive will take 3 hours, no more. After I saw Lloyd off, I went back into the house feeling pleasantly excited. A little adventure was just what I needed. I had been enjoying my new life in Gulfport for the past few months, but sometimes I still felt a little confined by the routine. Dances on Tuesdays and Fridays, garden club on Wednesdays, meetings with Rowena on Mondays, Sunday walks with Lloyd. Comfortable but predictable. The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. Bennett's name popped up on the screen. Hi, honey, I answered, trying to keep my voice upbeat. My son's calls rarely brought good news. Mum, are Renichi busy this Friday night? He asked without preamble. I hesitated for a moment. The trip with Lloyd was a done deal, but something in Bennett's voice made me wary. I had plans. Why? It's Piper's birthday, he said, a begging tone in his voice. She wants to celebrate at the restaurant, and she wanted me to tell you she'd love to see you. I snorted involuntarily. Piper had never been happy to see me, but a birthday. Is she really turning 40? Or is it 41 already? I suddenly realized I didn't remember exactly. What restaurant? Azure Beach. You know it. It just opened up in downtown Gulfport. I've heard of the place. A new fancy restaurant overlooking the bay that served Mediterranean food at exorbitant prices. Rowena mentioned it as a haven for snobs and tourists with fat wallets. I know it's a pretty expensive place, yeah. But, this is a special occasion. Bennett was clearly uncomfortable. Piper wants everything to be upscale. I stayed silent thinking about the situation. On the one hand, the trip with Lloyd was all-come opportunity to get away from my usual surroundings. On the other, no matter how I felt about Piper, she was me son's wife. Missing her birthday would just further strain an already strained relationship. Mum, are you still here? Yeah, I think so. I sighed. What time do you have Tobe at the restaurant? 7 o'clock. We have reservations for 8 people. 8, if round. There should be 4 of us. Bennett, Piper, Iris, and me. Who else is coming? Piper's parents are coming up from Charleston, and her brother and his wife have promised to be there too. Oh, that's great. The whole family's here. I hardly knew Piper's relatives, having only seen them at Iris's wedding and christening, but what little I remembered didn't make me want to spend the evening with them. Okay, I'll be there, I said finally. Thanks, Mom. Bennett sounded relieved. Piper will be glad. I sat for a long time after the call, staring out the window at my little garden. I'd have to cancel my trip with Lloyd. The thought of it made me feel annoyed and guilty. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. Lloyd, it's me. I'm afraid I have some bad news about the trip. Lloyd listened to me in silence, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. I understand, he said at last. Family obligations. Sorry, please. Why don't we reschedule for next weekend? The festival is only on those dates. His voice sounded steady, but I could feel the disappointment. But that's okay. There will be other trips. Are you mad? No. Hazel. There was a softness in his voice now. I'm not mad. It's just, I think you sacrifice too much of your interest for people who don't appreciate it. His words struck a nerve. That's my son, Lloyd, and his family. I know that. But when was the last time you did something for yourself? Something you really wanted to do? I couldn't come up with an answer because he was right. Even moving to Gulfport, which seemed like such a bold move to me, was actually the fulfillment of a long-held dream put on hold because of family obligations. I got to go. Can we talk later? I asked, sensing the conversation was taking an unpleasant turn. Sure, he said, the same restraint in his voice again. Call me whenever you want. After talking to Lloyd, I felt devastated. Maybe he was right. Maybe it really is time for me to stop fitting in with Bennett and Piper. But how do you explain that to a man who's never been apparent? Lloyd, for all his virtues, couldn't understand what it meant to be a mother. That bond is an unbreakable, even when the relationship is far from perfect. Friday night, I wore a dark blue dress with a silver brooch. Conservative but elegant. At the last minute, I decided to add a bright fuchsia-colored scarf given by Rowena. As a small act of defiance, I decided to walk to the restaurant. The evening was warm and the distance was short. As I passed the city park, I saw a familiar figure on a bench. Rowena was reading a book, placing a small picnic basket next to her. Hazel, she waved at me. Where are you dressed up like that? I walked over and sat down next to her. For my sister-in-law's birthday to the Côte d'Azur. Rowena whistled. That's not cheap. Is your son paying for the banquet? I suppose so. I shrugged. You never know with Piper, though. What do you mean? I told her about the phone conversation I'd had with Bennett, and how I'd had to cancel the trip with Lloyd. And he's mad. Not mad, but upset. Said I sacrificed too much for people who don't appreciate it. Rowena nodded as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. He's right. You know, I've been watching you for almost a year now, and every time your son or that wife office calls, you drop everything and run at the first call. And what do you get in return? Criticism and hints of money. I sighed. It's complicated, Rowena. Bennett is my only child, and that gives him the right to treat you like an ATM or a backup nanny. Rowena shook her head. Honey, I've raised 3 children. They all live in different states. Call it Christmas and Mother's Day. Sometimes send pictures of grandchildren. And you know what? I'm fine. I've lived my life. They're living theirs. It's okay. But you don't feel lonely sometimes? She shrugged. But then I call my friends, go to a dance or the library. Life goes on, Hazel. And it's too short to waste it on people who don't bring you joy. Roni's words made me think. I always thought I was sacrificing myself for my son out of love. But what if it's just a habit? What if I'm really just afraid to admit that my boy has grown up and doesn't need me anymore? Thank you, Rowena. I rose from the bench. I have to go. I don't want to be late. Good luck, she squeezed my hand. And remember, you didn't owe anyone anything, not even your own son. The restaurant Azure Coast fully corresponded to its pretentiousness. The facade was made in the Mediterranean style. White walls, blue shutters, twisted columns. Inside, dim lighting, live music, snow-white tablecloths and crystal glasses. A maitre in an impeccable suit met me at entrance. Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation? I'm here to see the Thorndike family, I replied. For Mrs. Piper Thornike's birthday. He checked the table plan. Oh yes, a table for 8. Follow me, please. I followed him across the room, feeling the stares of the customers. At times like this, I always felt out of place, as if I were labelled an old woman who didn't belong here. Our table was at the panoramic window overlooking the bay. Bennett was already there along with Iris and Piper's parents, Hubert and Connie Welch. Piper herself was nowhere to be seen. Mum, Bennett came up to kiss me on the cheek. You're just in time. Hello, darling. Hello, Iris. I hugged my granddaughter, who, unlike her 15 years, looked grown up in her black dress. Mr. and Mrs. Welch, it's good to see you. Hubert Welch, a tall man with thinning grey hair and a punch, nodded at me with a polite smile. His wife, Connie, appetite blonde with perfect styling and a pearl necklace, smiled strangely. Hazel, it's been a long time, she said with a slight southern accent. You look great for your age. That for your age sounded like an insult, but I was used to such compliments. Thank you, Connie. You look wonderful too. I sat down next to Iris, who looked bored. How was school? I asked, trying to make conversation. It's okay, she shrugged. The teachers are so annoying with the exams. It's like the end of the world instead of regular tests. Iris, watch your mouth, Bennett said automatically, still looking at the menu. Where's Piper? I asked, looking around. She's meeting Bradley and Kimberly out front, Bennett answered. They were running a little late. Bradley was Piper's younger brother and Kimberly was his wife. I'd only seen them at Bennett's wedding, and remembered them as a rather rowdy couple, who drank a lot and laughed loudly at their own jokes. So, Hazel Connie leaned across the table to me. How are you doing in Gulfport? Piper told me you bought a little cottage by the sea. Yeah, a cottage 3 blocks from the beach. I love it. And you're all in there. She sounded genuinely curious. Isn't it scary? Not at all. I smiled. I have wonderful neighbors and friends nearby. Friends? That's nice. Piper mentioned that you found yourself some company. I tensed up. Of course, Piper couldn't help but tell her parents about Lloyd in the dance. Yeah, I've made some new friends. I'm in the gardening club and I go to the senior dance. Connie and Hubert exchanged glances. Dancing at your age? Hubert didn't hide his surprise. It must be interesting. I opened my mouth to answer, but Piper came to the table, accompanied by a young couple. Sorry I'm late, she announced. Bradley and Kimberly were stuck in traffic. Piper looked gorgeous in a tight red dress that emphasized her slim figure. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo, and her makeup was flawless. Looking at her, I remembered what had attracted Bennett to her. Her looks were impressive. It was just a shame that her personality didn't match it. Happy birthday, Piper. I rose to kiss her cheek. You look beautiful. Thank you, Hazel. She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. I'm glad you could make it, Bradley. A young man in his 30s with fashionable stubble and slicked back hair shook my hand vigorously. Mrs. Thorndyke, long time no see. Just Hazel, please. I smiled. And yes, I believe it's been since your wedding. Oh, right. It's been 5 years. Can you believe it? He patted Kimberly on the arm. And now we have a baby on the way. Kimberly, a skinny brunette with huge brown eyes, smiled embarrassedly as she stroked her barely visible belly. 4th month, she said. It's a boy. Congratulations. I was genuinely happy. That's wonderful news. The dinner continued, and I was getting more uncomfortable by the minute. Piper was the center of attention, accepting compliments and gifts. I watched the entire family wastefully order the most expensive dishes and wines on the menu as if money didn't matter. Looking at the lavish table settings and exquisite delicacies, I couldn't help but think that this was less a celebration than a display of status. When the waiter brought another bottle of expensive wine, I noticed Piper and her mother exchanging meaningful glances. Something about their behavior made me wary. Suddenly, I realized that I'd been feeling vaguely uneasy all this time for a reason. The choice of venue, the invitation of Piper's entire family, the ostentatious luxury, all of it indicated that this evening had been planned for a purpose, and I was beginning to suspect what that purpose was. Dinner at the Azure had been a real test of my nerves. After exchanging pleasantries with Piper's parents and a stilted conversation with Iris, I watched my son and his family act like nouveau riche nobles who'd had their fill of luxury. A waiter in a white shirt and black vest handed us menus and leather folders. I opened Edmund and almost gasped at the prices. Even the most modest meal costs more than I usually spend on groceries in a week. We have to try the lobster, Piper exclaimed, pointing to the seafood page. They say they make it here with truffle oil and saffron. Honey, that's the most expensive dish on the menu, Bennett said, but without conviction. So what? She pouted. It's my birthday. Bennett. 40 years only comes once in a lifetime. Of course you're right. He agreed quickly. Order whatever you want. Piper's parents immediately followed suit, choosing marbled beefsteaks and a bottle of red wine from the 2010 vintage. Bradley and Kimberly took a long look at the menu, and then decided on the sea plateau for 2. An assortment of oysters, crabs, shrimp, and scallops that, judging by the price, was plated, if not in gold, at least in silver. What'll you have? Hazel? Connie Piper's mother asked with that special intonation one uses when talking to small children or the elderly. I'm thinking goat cheese salad and chicken breast, I replied, choosing the most reasonably priced entree. Salad. Piper was surprised. Hazel, tonight is a special night. Why don't you order something more festive? I'm not really hungry, I lied. Besides, at my age, I need to watch my cholesterol. Oh yes, of course. Piper smiled, but there was disappointment in her eyes. Age? Bennett ordered a bottle of champagne, and soon the waiter returned with a tray of crystal glasses. The cork popped, and the sparkling wine foamed. To my beautiful wife, Bennett proclaimed, raising his glass. Happy birthday, my dear. Everyone joined in the toast, and I took a small sip of champagne. It was excellent dry with notes of citrus and a subtle aftertaste. But even that couldn't brighten the oppressive atmosphere of the evening. So, Hazel Bradley turned to me after the second drink. Piper says you're into dancing now. The way he said it was clear that his sister hadn't told him about it in the most flattering light. Yes, I go to a dance club for the elderly, I said calmly. It's good exercise and a good time. Are there a lot of dates there? He winked, and Kimberly giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Enough, I answered dryly, feeling fecular. Rise to my cheeks. A lot of widowers are looking for dancing company. Just for dancing? Bradley persisted, clearly enjoying my embarrassment. Bradley, Bennett said warningly, but Piper put her hand on his shoulder. Oh, come on, honey. It's just a joke. I'm sure Hazel wouldn't mind laughing at herself a little. Would you, Hazel? I took another sip of champagne, feeling the anger building up inside. But instead of showing it, I smiled. Of course you did, Piper. A sense of humor is one of the few advantages of old age, along with wisdom and the ability to see people through. I said the last words, looking her straight in the eye, and for a second I saw her smile waver. The appetizers arrived, and the conversation turned to the food for a while. Everyone admired the exquisite flavors and elegant presentation of the food. The champagne ran out, and Bennett ordered a bottle of white wine for the appetizers, and another bottle of red wine for the main courses. By the way, Connie said, stabbing a piece of foie gras with her fork, Piper tells me you have a special friend. Hazel. What's his name? Lloyd? I answered, feeling my shoulders tense. Lloyd Abies. And what does this Lloyd do? Lloyd? Hubert. Piper's father asked, interested in the conversation for the first time. He's a former fishing boat captain. Retired now. Fisherman? Connie said the word as if it were an obscenity. That's an interesting choice. Captain of a fishing boat. I corrected. It's a big responsibility. Lloyd commanded a crew of 12 and was responsible for a ship worth several $1 million. Still, Piper interjected. It's rather unusual for someone your age to make such an intimate acquaintance. Why? I asked bluntly. Is there an age limit to friendship or sympathy? Friendship is one thing, Connie said meaningfully. But a closer relationship. Mum, please. Piper interrupted her, though it was obvious she was enjoying the conversation. Hazel had the right to run her life as she saw fit. Even if some of her decisions seem eccentric, I'd say brave. Kimberly interjected, and Averian turned to look at her. What? I think it's great to find joy in life at any age. I smiled gratefully at her, surprised by this sudden encouragement. Thank you, Kimberly. Lloyd really does bring a lot of joy to my life. We had planned to go to Georgetown this weekend for the shrimp festival, but I had to cancel the trip because of tonight's dinner. Oh. Piper looked slightly embarrassed. I hope we didn't disrupt your plans too much. Not at all. I lied. Family comes first. That's very sweet of you, Connie said with undisguised sarcasm. Always putting family first. Although I have to admit, some of your decisions make me question. That? What do you mean? I felt my fist clench under the table. Well, like selling the family home, Hubert interjected. Piper told Method you sold the house where Bennett grew up to buy a cottage by the sea. It was my house, I said firmly. I had every right to use it as I saw fit. Legally, of course, Hubert agreed. But morally, it's a family legacy. Bennett could inherit it and then pass it on to Iris. Bennett and Piper have a lovely home, I said. Besides, they never said anything about wanting to move into the old house on Cypress Street. It's not about wanting to move, Piper interjected. It's the principle of it. It was the Thorndike house, part of the family history. I looked at Bennett, expecting him to say something in my defense, but he just smiled awkwardly and took a big sip of wine. Anyway, Piper continued, what's done is done. Hazel is now living in her charming cottage, going to dances, and dating the captain of the fishing boat. Very modern for a woman of a generation. There was such condescension in her voice that I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. But before I could respond, The main courses arrived, and everyone's attention turned to the food. Piper's lobster was huge, served on a silver platter, with a side of asparagus and truffle sauce. Her parents' steaks were at least 2 in thick with a perfect crust and pink center. Bradley and Kimberly's seafood plateau was an entire arrangement of different food decorated with edible flowers and seaweed. My chicken breast, though cooked perfectly, looked more than a little humble. "It's delicious," Piper moaned as she popped a bite of lobster into her mouth. "Hazel, you have to try it. It's divine." She handed me a fork with a piece of meat, and I took it. Not to be impolite. "It's really good," I agreed, though I honestly didn't find much to like about the overrated delicacy. "You see what you're missing with your diet chicken," Piper laughed. "Sometimes you have to allow yourself small pleasures, even if it's a little expensive." I noticed her glance at Bennett, who was completely engrossed in his filt minion. The bottles of wine were emptied one by one, and with each glass, the conversation became more animated and less restrained. Bradley began to tell obscene jokes. Connie laughed loudly. Hubert patted Bennett on the shoulder like an old friend. Only Iris sat silent, occasionally casting sympathetic glances at me. "How did you meet this fisherman?" Bradley asked suddenly, returning to the subject that seemed to interest the Welch family. "At the dance," I answered briefly, not wanting to give them any more reason to ridicule me. "How long have you two been dancing together?" He winked and Kimberly slapped his arm lightly. "About 3 months," I decided to ignore the implication. "Lloyd's a very good dancer, especially the tango." "The tango," Connie exclaimed. "Such a passionate dance. Wow, would have thought." "Mum." Piper stopped her, though she could tell she was laughing hard. "Don't embarrass Hazel. I'm sure they're dancing very decent." "Oh, I don't doubt it." Connie took a big sip of wine. "It's just amazing how some people at that age find the strength to dancing." "Perhaps it's the company," Hubert said with a grin. "The right partner can inspire a lot." "Enough," Iris exclaimed suddenly. "Why do you keep talking about Grandma's age? She's not some ancient mummy. She's just a person who wants to live a normal life." There was silence at the table. Piper stared at her daughter with her mouth open. Bennett blinked confusedly, and the Welch family looked as if someone had spilled wine on their designer outfits. "Iris," Piper began icily, "don't be rude to your elders." "I'm not being rude," the girl countered. "I'm just saying that I don't understand why everyone thinks it's so weird that Grandma goes to dances and is friends with someone. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing, dear," I intervened, to shed her support. "Your mom is right. There's no need to get upset. It's just a joke." "Not very funny jokes," Iris mumbled, but she was silent under her father's stern gaze. After this incident, the dinner continued in a more tense atmosphere. The conversation turned to neutral topics. Bennett's work, Iris's schoolwork, Bradley and Kimberly's plans for the future after the baby was born. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate chocolate cake with raspberry sauce and gold flakes, I was wishing the evening would end. My head was starting to hurt from the noise and the endless glasses of wine that everyone kept filling despite my protests. "To the birthday girl," Bennett proclaimed, raising another glass. "To my beautiful wife who only gets better every year." Everyone seconded the toast and Piper blossomed with pleasure. She was truly beautiful at this moment, flushed from the wine and compliments glowing in the candlelight dot. "Thank you all for sharing this special day with me," she said, looking around the table. "Especially you, Hazel. I know you cannot your plans for me, and it's very much appreciated." There was such sincerity in her voice that for a moment I almost believed she was glad I was here. Almost. When the dessert was finished, the waiter brought coffee and digestifies. I declined the liquor, limiting myself to a cup of espresso. The clock read almost 11 p.m., and I was feeling tired after a long emotionally-justice evening. I think I should go, I said, finishing my coffee. Thank you for a wonderful evening, and happy birthday again, Piper. You're leaving already? She wondered. But we haven't gotten the bill yet. Bennett can give me a ride later, Iris suggested. I'm tired too. No, dear. Piper shook her head. We still have some things we need to discuss together. At that moment, as if on cue, the maitre approached the table with a leather folder in his hands. Your bill, sir. He held it out to Bennett, but Piper quickly intercepted it. Oh, allow me. She opened the folder and pretended to study the contents. That's right. A very reasonable amount for such a wonderful evening. She handed the folder to me, and I automatically took it. Opening the account, I nearly choked at the amount I saw. $234,860, including $800 worth of alcohol. Piper, what does that mean? I asked, feeling me heart start to beat faster. Oh, didn't Bennett tell you? She acted surprised. We thought you wanted to pay for dinner as a birthday present for me. He said you insisted. I looked at Bennett, who was suddenly very interested in the contents of his coffee cup. I never suggested anything like that, I said firmly. And Bennett knows it, does he? Piper continued to play surprised. That's odd. He definitely said you wanted to give me a special gift. Something to do with compensation for the house you sold on Cypress Street. I felt the blood drain from my face. They planned this in advance. They chosen the most expensive restaurant invited. Piper's entire family ordered the most exquisite food and expensive wine, and all with the expectation that I would pay the bill without complaint at the end of the evening. Piper, Bennett began, raising his eyes at last. I didn't exactly. Hush, darling. She put her hand on his shoulder. Don't embarrass Hazel. I'm sure she doesn't mind. After all, what's a couple thousand compared to the joy of family togetherness? Everyone at the table watched the scene with varying degrees of interest. Piper's parents looked smug. Bradley and Kimberly looked slightly embarrassed. And Iris looked frankly dumbfounded. I'm not paying that bill, I said calmly, handing the folder back to Piper. Bennett invited me to your birthday dinner. No one said a word about me having to pay for it. Piper's face changed, the smile disappearing, giving way to irritation. But Bennett had said, Bennett didn't say anything like that. I interrupted her. And Yauk know it, Mother. Bennett interposed. There may have been a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. I picked up my bag and stood up from the table. You and Piper organized this evening. You ordered the food and wine. You're paying for it. I'm leaving. But Bennett looked confused. Good night, everyone. He nodded to the guests. It was, informative. I headed for the exit, feeling the stares of not only our table, but the other guests as well. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking slightly, but I was determined to leave with my head held high. Mother-in-law. Piper's sharp voice echoed throughout the restaurant. Where do you think you're going? I was counting on you to pay my bill. It stopped and turned around slowly. Piper stood leaning on the table, her face contorted with anger and disappointment. Everyone in the restaurant froze, watching the drama unfold. At that moment, something in me snapped. All the years of restrained irritation, all the concessions, all the attempts to keep the peace for Bennett's sake, all of it suddenly seemed pointless and humiliating. I turned back to the table, looking straight into Piper's eyes. Yauk know what? Piper, I said, and my voice sounded surprisingly calm. I've put up with your disrespect, your taunts, your constant hints about money. I put up with the way you turn my son against me. I've even put up with you trying to limit my contact with my granddaughter. But this, I pointed to the bill. This is too much. I don't know what you mean. Piper tried to keep her face straight, but her voice shook. Bennett said. Bennett never said I was paying for this dinner, I said firmly. You're lying, and everyone here knows it. Mum, please, Bennett began, but I held up my hand to stop him. No, son, it's time to tell the truth. Piper invited her entire family to the most expensive restaurant in town, ordered lobster and wine for $200 a bottle for the sole purpose of making me pay for it all. She decided that I was so desperate to be a part of your life that I would swallow any humiliation. That's not true, Piper exclaimed, but her voice sounded unconvincing. It is, I replied calmly. And you know what? I'm not going to be part of this anymore. I'm not an ATM machine, Piper. I'm a living person with my own wants, needs, and plans. And I have every right to spend my money as I see fit. On a cottage by the sea, on dancing, on trips with Lloyd. It's Mimini, earned over 40 years of honest labor, and I don't have to pay for your whims. There was dead silence in their restaurant. Even the waiters froze, watching our confrontation. How dare you? Piper began, but her mother put her hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Hazel, Hubert interjected. Perhaps we've all had a little too much wine. And no, Hubert, I shook my head. It's not the wine. It's about attitude. Your daughter has been trying to manipulate me for years using my love for my son and granddaughter. But today, she went too far. I turned to Bennett, who looked as if he'd been punched in the butt. Son, I love you. I always have and I always will. But I won't put up with the way you let your wife treat me anymore. You can call me when you're ready to have an honest conversation. Now I'm leaving. I headed for the exit, but I stopped beside Iris and squeezed her shoulder lightly. You can always come to me, sweetheart. Anytime. The girl nodded, her eyes full of tears. As I walked out of their restaurant into the warm evening air, I inhaled deeply, feeling strangely light. For the first time in years, I was fighting back, and it was liberating. I didn't look back as I walked away from Azure. I knew I was leaving, behind not only an unpaid bill, but years of silent acceptance of disrespect and manipulation. Ahead was the unknown, perhaps even a breakup with my son. But at that moment, I felt only relief and a quiet, calm confidence that I had done the right thing. I awoke to the insistent ringing of the phone. Sunlight was already flooding the room, but my clock showed only 7 in the morning. Wow would be calling this early. Hello. My voice sounded hoarser after a restless night. Mom. Bennett's voice was strained. We need to talk. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. The events of last night came flooding back to me in a wave of memories. The lavish restaurant, the Welch. Family's taunts, Piper's manipulations, and finally my unexpected rebuff, including my own. Good morning, Bennett, I said quietly. How was the rest of your evening? How was it? His voice rose an octave. Are you seriously asking me that after you made a scene and walked out, leaving us to deal with the bill? I didn't make a scene, I countered. It just refused to pay for a dinner I'd been invited to that no one said I had to pay for. Piper was sure we discussed it. The stubbornness I knew so well was in his voice. She thought I wanted to give her a gift. Bennett. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but we both know that's not true. Neither you nor I ever discussed me paying for this dinner. Piper made it up on the spot, hoping I wouldn't want to argue in front of her family. Silence hung on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears working in my son's head as he tried to reconcile his wife's obvious lies with his desire to keep peace in the family. Look, Mom, he finally said, his voice softer, more pleading. I understand there's been a misunderstanding, that Piper is very upset. Can't you just, apologize to her? For me? I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of frustration rising inside. So many years, so many concessions and compromises. And here it was again, Mjorn's son asking me to apologize for not letting his wife manipulate me. No, Bennett, I said firmly. I will not apologize for doing nothing wrong. If anyone should apologize, it should be Piper for lying and manipulating me. Mom, please. He sounded annoyed. Why do you always make everything so complicated? It was just a bill. You could have just paid it and not made a scene. Just a bill. I couldn't believe my ears. Bennett, they ordered $2,348 worth of food and wine. That's not just a bill. Did you do the math? You snorted. Of course I counted, I replied. Unlike some people, I always know how much I'm spending and what I'm spending it on. What are you trying to say? His voice turned cold. I'm saying that you and Piper are living beyond your means. The words came out before I could think about them. You spend money on fancy luxuries and then you look for Samionetto pay your bills. That's not true. Bennett was indignant. We have a good income. My business. Your business is barely afloat. I interrupted him. Don't you think I know that? I see how tense you get every time a bill comes in. I see the worry in your eyes when Piper orders another expensive item. But instead of talking to her about the expense, you let her spend money left and right, and then come to me for help. There was a long pause. I could hear Myson's heavy breathing and I realized that I had hit a nerve. You don't understand, he said finally. Piper grew up in a certain environment. It's important for her to maintain a certain standard of living. And for you, I asked quietly, what's important to you, Bennett? For my family to be happy, he answered after a pause. And are you happy? I held my breath, waiting for an answer. Mum, stop it, he said with a warning in his voice. This has nothing to do with the case. This is about you insulting Piper in front of her whole family. They now think we can't afford dinner at a decent restaurant. Can you? I couldn't help myself. Of course we can. He was almost shouting. I paid damn bill, but it's not about the money. It's about the principle. You behaved terribly. No, Bennett. I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. Piper was the one who behaved horribly. She invited her entire family to an expensive restaurant for the sole purpose of making me pay the bill. She lied and manipulated and tried to humiliate me. And you know what the saddest part is? That you let her do it. You sat there and didn't say a word when she tried to make me look like a fraud. You're exaggerating. His voice beckoned me defensive. Piper just thought, no. Bennett, I interrupted him. No more lies, no more excuses. I'm tired of it. For years, I've watched Piper manipulate you. How she turns you against me. How she tries to control every aspect of your life. And for what? To make you happy. But you don't look happy, son. You look exhausted and stressed out all the time. You don't know anything about my life, he replied. Coldly. You live in your little world by the sea. Go dancing with your fishermen, and you think you have a right to judge my marriage. His words hurt me, but I didn't let the pain get the better of me. I'm not judging your marriage, Bennett. I'm just saying what I see, and that I will no longer remain silent when your wife tries to take advantage of me. Good. His voice sounded determined. Then listen carefully. If you don't apologize to Piper, you can forget about our visits. Forget about seeing Iris. It's your choice. I felt my heart clench with pain. The threat to cut me off from my granddaughter was cruel, but I couldn't give in. Not this time. Bennett, don't do this, I said quietly. Don't use Iris as a bargaining chip. It's not her fault. I'm not the one making the choice, AO are. His voice was cold. Apologize to Piper or forget about us. I won't apologize for defending myself, I said firmly. And if you decide to break things off because of that, that's on your conscience, not mine. Fine, he said. Goodbye, Mom. The phone went silent. I sat on the bed, still holding the phone in my hand, tears streaming down my cheeks. My son had just cut me out of his life because I refused to submit to his wife. I cried without holding back, allowing myself to completely wallow in the pain for the first time in a long time. When the tears finally dried up, I got up, washed my face, and dialed the number with determination. Lloyd, it's me. Can you come over? An hour later, we were sitting with Lloyd on my veranda, looking out over the garden where the wind was playing with the leaves of the rose bushes. I told him about last night, and about my conversation with Bennett today. Did he really put you to that choice? Lloyd looked indignant. Apologize to this a lady, or never see my granddaughter again. Yes, I sighed. And the worst part is that part of me wants to give in just so I don't lose Iris. Lloyd took my hand, his palm warm and soothing. Hazel, listen to me. If you give in now, this will never end. They'll realize they can blackmail you into a relationship with Iris, and they'll do it again and again. I know, it whispered, but she's just a child. She shouldn't have to suffer because of adult disagreements. Iris isn't a little girl anymore, Lloyd said softly. She's 15, and from what you've told me, she's capable of forming her own opinions. She stood up for you yesterday, didn't she? I nodded, remembering how Iris had resented her, mocking my age. Perhaps you underestimate your granddaughter, Lloyd continued. If she wants to communicate with you, she'll find a way, even if her parents don't want her to. I hope you're all right. I squeezed his hand. Thank you for listening. Always. He smiled. And you know what? I'm proud of you. What you did yesterday took a lot of courage, at that moment. The garden wicket creaked open, and Rowena appeared on the path with a basket filled with freshly baked goods. Good morning, love birds, she exclaimed, as she climbed the veranda steps. I thought you might need my signature blueberry muffins after last night. You already know. I was surprised, honey. It's all anyone in Gulfport is talking about. Rowena set the basket on the table and sat down next to us. Mrs. Patterson from the flower store was at the Azure last night. She told everyone at the garden club this morning how our Hazel Thorndyke put that arrogant sister-in-law in her place. I groaned, covering my face with my hands. God, I'm a local sensation now. And a very positive one, Rowena assured me. Everyone admires your bravery. A lot of people put up with that kind of attitude from their relatives for years, and never find the strength to fight back. Bennett called this morning, I said. He wants me to apologize to Piper. Otherwise, they'll stop talking to me. Rowena snorted. And what have you got to lose? From what you've told me, they only visit you when they need something. Iris, I answered quietly. I'm losing Iris. Rowena softened and put a hand on my shoulder. Darling, you're not losing your granddaughter. She's old enough to know what's going on. And from the way she stood up for you yesterday, she's clearly on your side. That's exactly what I was saying, Lloyd said. Iris would find a way to keep in touch if she wanted to. I looked at the two people who'd only recently come into my life, but were already such an important part of it. Their support gave me a strength I hadn't felt in years. Thank you, I said, feeling my eyes fill with tears again, but this time with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you. Eat less blueberry muffins, Rowena joked, opening the basket. Now, let's have breakfast and talk about what to do next. Over muffins and coffee, we talked more constructively about the situation. Lloyd suggested giving Bennett time to cool down before trying to contact him again. When the initial anger passed, he might take a more sober view of the situation, he said, especially if Piper continued to press him for more and more. In the meantime, Rowena added, "You should think about protecting yourself legally." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your will." Rowena was as blunt as ever. "If Bennett and Piper are willing to break things off over one restaurant bill, think what might happen when it comes to your inheritance." I never really thought much about a will. After Edgar died, it just left it as it was. In the event of my death, all the property would go to Bennett as sole heir. But now, in light of recent events, that decision didn't seem so clear-cut. "You're right," I nodded. "I need to rethink some things." "I know a good lawyer," Lloyd suggested. "Nathan Holliday. He specializes in probate law. If you want, I can arrange a meeting." "Yes, please," I agreed. "The sooner the better." Lloyd pulled out his phone and stepped away to make a call. And Rowena moved closer to me. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked quietly. "Changing a will is a big step. I'm not sure about anything anymore," I answered honestly. "But I do know that I didn't want my money and property to go to Piper. She's just waiting for me to die, so she can get access to my savings." "What about Iris?" I wondered. Despite my disagreements with my son and daughter-in-law, I couldn't blame Iris. She had always been a kind and sensitive girl, even if she sometimes succumbed to her mother's influence. "I want to leave something to Iris," I decided. "Maybe a trust fund for her education that she could get when she was of age." Rowena nodded approvingly. "A sensible solution. That way you'll provide for your granddaughter without giving Piper access to money." Lloyd returned, tucking his phone into his pocket. "Nathan can see us at 2:00 today. He's got a window between appointments. Not so soon." I wondered. I explained that it was urgent. Lloyd winked. "And maybe he mentioned that you were an acquaintance of Judge Prescott's." I looked at Rowena in surprise. "Your late husband was a Judge Circuit." She waved her hand nonchalantly. "Nothing special, but in a small town like Gulfport, that name still opens some doors." At 2:00, Lloyd and I entered a small but elegant office building in downtown Gulfport. Nathan Holliday's office was on the second floor and gave the impression of a place where serious business was done. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, legal tomes on the shelves. Nathan himself was younger than I had expected. A man in his 40s with a friendly smile and penetrating eyes. He greeted Lloyd warmly and shook my hand respectfully. "Mrs. Thorndyke, nice to meet you." Lloyd briefly explained the situation, "But I'd like to hear all the details from you." I told him about the situation, trying to be objective and not too emotional. Nathan listened attentively, occasionally making notes in his notebook. So he said, "When I had finished, if I understood correctly, you want to change your will to exclude your son and his wife, but leave a share to your granddaughter." "Yes," I nodded. "Is that possible?" "Absolutely," Nathan answered confidently. "You have the right to dispose of your property as you see fit. We can create a trust fund for your granddaughter, which she can receive when she reaches a certain age, or when she fulfills certain conditions such as going to college." "And what happens to the rest?" Lloyd asked. "That is up to Mrs. Thorndyke." Nathan turned to me. "You can leave the rest of the property to any other person or organization, a charitable foundation, other relatives, friends." I thought about it. I had knew the close relatives. My younger sister had died of cancer 10 years ago, and her children lived somewhere on the West Coast, and we barely spoke to each other. "I need to think about it," I said. "But a trust fund for Iris is a definite." "Sure," Nathan nodded. "We can start with that and work out the rest of the details later. It is important that the new will be drawn up as soon as possible, especially under the circumstances." We spent the next hour discussing the details of the trust fund for Iris. I decided to leave her an amount sufficient to pay for 4 years of tuition at a prestigious college, plus additional funds for living and other expenses. The fund was to come under her control when she turned 21 or sooner if she enrolled in college. About the rest of the estate, my cottage, savings and investments, I was still in doubt. Part of me wanted to leave everything to a charitable organization that supports young pharmacists in memory of my career. The other part was thinking about dividing what was left between Lloyd and Rowena, the two people who had brought so much joy to my life over the past year. You don't have to decide everything now, Nathan assured me, seeing my hesitation. We can set up a trust for Iris and change the main heirs, leaving the details for later. Yes, I think that would be best, I agreed. I need time to think things through. When we finished the meeting, Nathan shook my hand and assured me that the documents would be ready by the end of the week. I will call you as soon as everything is ready to be signed, he said. In the meantime, if you have any questions or make a decision about the rest of the property, feel free to call me at any time. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt strangely relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The decision to change my will had not been easy, but I knew I was doing the right thing. How are you feeling? Lloyd asked as we walked to his car. Better than I expected, I answered honestly. It was a hard step, but a necessary one. I'm proud of you, he squeezed my hand lightly. No Tavirian is capable of defending themselves, especially when it comes to family. We got in the car and Lloyd turned to me. You know what? Let's celebrate. Let's go out to dinner. What do you say? I smiled, feeling the tension of the last few days begin to let go. I'd love to, not the Côte d'Azur, I joked, and we both laughed. I know a better place. Lloyd started the engine. It's a little restaurant on the pier. They have the best crab cakes around and live music in the evenings. Sounds perfect. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the window at the streets of Gulfport. Passing by, I may have lost my son and his family, at least for a while. But I had gained something equally precious, self-respect and the freedom to be myself. And looking at Lloyd's calm, kind face, I thought that sometimes the end can be the beginning of something new and beautiful. That evening, coming home from dinner with Lloyd, I found a message on my answering machine. Iris's voice sounded muffled, as if she were speaking in a whisper. Grandma, it's me. Just wanted to tell you that Mom and Dad have forbidden me to talk to you. Beauty'll still call when I can. You didn't do anything wrong. I love you. Bye. I stood in the semi-dark room, listening to the short beeps after the message, and felt tears of joy flow down my cheeks. My granddaughter had found a way to contact me despite her parents' prohibition. Perhaps I hadn't lost her completely. With that thought, I went to bed feeling strangely calm. Life goes on, even when everything seems to be falling apart. And sometimes, you have to lose something to realize how much stronger you are than you thought. The feel of the salty breeze on my skin and the sound of the waves crashing against the side of the ship made me smile. Lloyd and I stood on the deck of the cruise ship, watching the outline of Gulfport loom on the horizon. 3 weeks in the Caribbean had come to an end, and we were coming home, tanned, and I could confidently say this, even more in love with each other. Do you miss home? Lloyd asked, putting his arm around my shoulders. Yes and no, I admitted. The trip had been amazing, but I missed my garden. I wonder how my roses did without me. Rowena promised to water them, Lloyd reminded me. I'm sure they're doing just fine. I nodded, but my thoughts were no longer on the flowers. It had been 4 months since that night at the Azure, when I'd finally fought back against Piper and Bennett. 4 months with no calls from my son, no visits, no attempts on his part to repair the relationship. I knew I could have made the first move myself, but something inside me resisted the idea. For the first time in years, I felt free of manipulation and guilt, and I didn't want to go back to the old pattern. "You're thinking about Bennett?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. Lloyd was always somehow able to guess my thoughts. Yes. I didn't deny it. I wondered if anything had changed since we'd been away. "If it had, Rowena would have let us know," Lloyd said softly. "She'd promised to keep us up to date on local news." That was true. Rowena contacted us regularly by video link, telling us what was going on in Gulfport, but she hadn't mentioned Bennett and Piper, and I hadn't asked. I hadn't heard from Iris in a while either. She'd contacted me a few more times since that first secret call, but then the calls had stopped. I worried that Piper had somehow gotten wind of our conversations and had taken action. "You know," Lloyd sighed, interrupting my musings. "Whatever happened to Bennett and his family, you did everything you could. It's up to them now." I smiled gratefully at him. This man who'd come into my life less than a year ago understood me better than anyone else. "You're right." I squeezed his hand. "And you know what? I feel truly happy for the first time in years. Free. You should be." Lloyd kissed me temple. "You deserve to be happy, Hazel." When the ship docked in Gulfport, Rowena was waiting for us on the dock with a bouquet of wild flowers and a wide smile. "Welcome home, travelers," she exclaimed, hugging us in turn. "How was the cruise? You were so tanned." "It was amazing," I replied, breathing in the familiar smell of flowers. "Thank you for the flowers, Rowena." On the way to Rowena's house, I couldn't help but notice how much Gulfport had changed during our absence. New signs had appeared. The waterfront had begun to be renovated, and a new playground had been installed in the park. The city lived its life without noticing my personal dramas. "What's new in town?" Lloyd asked, apparently noticing my interest. "Oh, a little bit of everything." Rowena perked up. "The mayor announced the reconstruction of the pier, which is big news. Then the Garden Club has a new chairman. Remember Mrs. Henderson? She's moved to Florida to stay with her daughter." Rowena continued to talk about local news, but I noticed that she studiously avoided mentioning my family. That confirmed my suspicions. There was no news from Bennett. Over lunch, we talked about our trip, the crystal clear waters of the Caribbean, the white beaches of Barbados, the colorful markets of Jamaica. Lloyd enthusiastically discussed the deep sea fishing he had participated in, and I shared my impressions of the local cuisine and architecture. "It sounds like you had a great time," Rowena said, pouring coffee. "And judging by our happy faces, this trip had brought you even closer together." I felt myself blushing. At 78, I hadn't expected to experience the thrill of first love, but that was exactly what was happening. The 3 weeks I'd spent with Lloyd in the cramped space of the cabin had shown me that our relationship had moved to a new level of intimacy and trust. "Rowena, have you heard from Bennett or Iris while we were gone?" I finally decided to ask. Rowena hesitated for a moment, and I realized there was news, and it wasn't good news. "Well," she began cautiously, "I didn't want to spoil your return, but yes, I know something. They're selling the house." "Selling the house?" I was shocked. "But why are they having money problems? Last I heard, Bennett had gotten a job offer in Chicago." Rowena explained something to do with expanding his business. "They're planning to move by the end of the summer." I leaned back in my chair trying to comprehend the news. Bennett's leaving Gulfport. Leaving without even trying to make up with me, and he's taking Iris. A week after we got back, I went downtown to get groceries. The day was sunny and warm, typical of early summer in Gulfport. I decided to walk, enjoying the nice weather and the chance to stretch my legs after sitting on the ship for so long. Walking out of the supermarket with a full shopping bag, I headed towards the park, my usual route home. And that's when, as I passed the ice cream parlor, I saw her Iris sitting at a table on the open veranda with a friend. She was laughing at something, and at that moment she reminded me so much of Bennett at her age that my heart snapped. I wanted to pass unnoticed, not wanting to embarrass my granddaughter, but she looked up and our eyes met. There was a look of surprise on her face and then joy. "Grandmother!" she exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. Without thinking, she ran over to me and hugged me tightly, nearly knocking the shopping bag out of my hands. "Iris," he hugged her back, feeling my eyes fill with tears. "How you've grown in these months." She pulled away but didn't let go of my arms. "I tried to call you, but no one answered. Then the neighbor said you went on a cruise with Mr. Abbreviations. Yes, we got back a week ago." I couldn't stop smiling as I looked at her. "You look wonderful, darling." And it was true. In the 4 months we hadn't seen each other, Iris seemed to have grown up. She was taller, our features more defined, and a confidence in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Can I join you?" she asked, pointing at her friend. Lisa and I were just about to leave. "Sure," I nodded. I'd very happy. "T.O." Iris quickly returned to the table, said goodbye to her friend, and came back to me with her back over her shoulder. "Let me help you with your bag." She took the purchases from me. "Are you going home?" "Yes, through the park." I couldn't stop looking at her, noting all the changes that had happened over the months. I walked down the park alley and for the first few minutes we were silent, not knowing where to start talking after such a long break. "I heard you were moving," I said finally. Iris nodded, looking down at her feet. "Dad got a job offer in Chicago. Something to do with a big furniture chain. Mom's excited about the idea of living in the big city." "How about you?" I asked cautiously. "Are you excited about the move?" Iris shrugged. "I didn't know. On the one hand, Chicago is cool. More opportunities. More everything. On the other hand, I'm leaving all my friends here. And you," she added quietly. I felt my heart clench. "We can keep in touch," I suggested. "Phone, internet. There are so many ways to communicate from a distance these days. If Mom says it's okay." Iris skeptically snorted. "She's still mad at you about the incident at the restaurant." "Are you?" I stopped and turned to my granddaughter. "Are you mad at me?" Iris shook her head firmly. "None nip too. I think you did the right thing. Mom sometimes overreact. She always wants everything her way, and doesn't know how to take no for an answer." I was surprised at the maturity of her judgment. Iris seemed to see the situation more clearly than I realized. "I don't want you to think badly of your mom," I said carefully. "We all have flaws." "I don't think badly of her," Iris countered. "I just see her for what she is, and sometimes unashamed of the way she acts. The day I was born was sunny and warm, perfect for a garden party. Lloyd arrived early in the morning with a huge bouquet of roses and a dainty silver bracelet with a starfish pendant, a reminder of our journey. Rowan arrived at lunchtime with a cake of her own making and a bottle of champagne. She was followed by other guests, neighbors, friends from the garden club, couples from the dance group. In all, about 15 people gathered. Time passed, the sun began to set, and Iris didn't show up. I tried not to show my disappointment, convincing myself that she was probably having trouble with her parents, or that she just couldn't sneak out of the house. We were about to cut the cake when the garden gate creaked softly, and Iris appeared on the path a little out of breath as if she'd been running. In her hands, she held a small package wrapped in brightly colored paper. I'm sorry I'm late. She came up to me, smiling embarrassedly. Happy birthday, Grandma, Iris. I couldn't hide my joy. You came. I promised. She held out a present to me. It's not very expensive, but I thought you'd like it. I unwrapped the paper and found a photo album, not an ordinary one, but a handmade one with a cloth cover, and the words Grandma and me embroidered on it. Inside were pictures of Iris and me from her infancy to our last moments together before our relationship broke up. Oh, Iris. I felt tears coming to my throat. This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received. I found old photos in the family album and scanned them, she explained. And then I made this scrapbook in my needlework class. Irena introduced Iris to the other guests, and soon my granddaughter was chatting casually with them, charming them all with her sincerity and mature judgment. I watched her with pride and thought about what a wonderful young woman she was becoming despite the difficult home environment. As darkness fell and the guests began to leave, Iris took me aside. I have to go too, she said regretfully. I told my parents I was going to the movies with Lisa, but if I stayed too long, they'd worry. Of course, honey. I nodded. Understandingly. Lloyd can take you home. No. I'd rather go myself, she said quickly. If they see what brought me, Grandma, Iris said, hugging me goodbye. We're leaving in a month, but I promise we'll stay in touch. I'll call and write, and maybe I can come for vacations. I'd really like that. I pulled her against me, not wanting to let her go. And know that my doors are always open to you. Always. I know. She pulled away and looked into my eyes. And one more thing, I want you to know that you understand why you did what you did at the restaurant and afterward. You had a right to defend yourself. Thank you, honey. I was touched by her words. It means a lot to me. Mom and Dad may never understand, Iris continued with sudden seriousness. They're too immersed in their own problems, but I understand. And I will always love you, no matter what they think. When Iris left, I returned to the remaining guests with a feeling of warmth and hope in my heart. Lloyd came over and put his arm around my shoulders. Is everything okay? He said quietly. Yeah, I smiled, looking up at the starry sky. More than okay. In that moment, standing in my garden among my friends with the man I loved by my side, and my granddaughter's promise to keep in touch, I realized that I had finally found the life I had always wanted. A life filled with love, respect, and true joy. And even if it wasn't perfect, it was my life. And I was grateful for every moment of